Hello and welcome to Eric McElroy's American Exchange. I'm Eric McElroy, and here is the podcast where I reach across the pond from the United Kingdom to find out what is going on in my home country, specifically with hardcore politics, which is strange why in this episode we talk a lot about a pop star. Not really my area of expertise, although I have been to Billie Eilish. Um, I took my daughter to Billie Eilish. I didn't go to Billie Eilish. She just was there, and my daughter wanted to go, and so I went to Billie Eilish. But that's not who we talk about. We'll get into that in a little bit when we start the podcast. This week we welcome back Reed Galen, who's an independent political strategist, and he co-founded the Lincoln Project, which is an organization set up by mostly, I believe, all former Republicans who were ad men, strategists, and who basically saw Donald Trump for what he is a existential attack on the American democracy, and have united back in 2015, 2016 to fight against him. So they've been doing that since then. We've had Rick Wilson, who's also on the Lincoln Project on before. We had Reed on in September of 2022, and plug for the previous conversation I had with him, which was right before the midterms, still very relevant. And if you're interested in what they do with the Lincoln Project and why they do what they do and why their strategy as essentially Republican ad men is so effective, that's a good episode to listen back to. We sort of take that as a given for this. But the core of what they say is that they're very focused on getting the job done, on winning the argument, because if you win the election, and then you win the agenda and can set things forward from there. Um, so it's another great conversation, especially in particular. There's a few things that happened this week in US politics that I really wanted to get my head around that I don't understand being so far away. So he covers those key big issues there related to the pop star, which we'll talk about in a second, and also to the border. Is it really a crisis? We talk a lot about that. There was a nice moment in there where he acknowledged what he's gone through working with Democrats over the last few years. And I'll let you find that in the podcast, but I'll talk about that at the back end. But it was nice to hear him say that. So yeah, thank you to Reed and the Lincoln Project for making the time, and please enjoy Reed Galen. Well, it's great to welcome back Reed Galen to the podcast. I'm really excited to talk to him again because the whole point of me doing this, as Reed knows, is me finding out the pulse of what's happening politically in the US as an expat who cares about his home country, cares about what's happening in the upcoming election in November of 2024. And he's a political expert. He's worked in presidential campaigns. He's worked in the White House. So, of course, I'm going to start this political podcast off by asking him about Taylor Swift.
Sure.
Reed, why am I asking you about Taylor Swift? I'm over here in England. I don't think she's running for president. Explain what the fuck is going on.
Sure. So, first, thanks for having me. Second, I wrote on my Substack, The Homefront, about this week. Is she represents, I think, for a large contingent of conservative Republicans and what I call "fuck you" white guys, a real threat. She is attractive. She is successful. She is wealthy. She is a monoculture, right? In 2023, going into 2024, have we had anybody like her in recent memory, maybe even in living memory, that was as popular across just about every demographic as she has been? Look, I attended a Taylor Swift concert with my daughters in Los Angeles last summer, and it is 70,000 happy people. Every single person in the place, from Taylor on stage to all her dancers, to the band, to the fans, to the security people, to people checking tickets. Like, everybody's in a good mood. And I've never seen or been anything like it. And when I say this, like, you know how sometimes fans like sing along with no, Taylor and 70,000 people are all singing together. Does that make sense? And so it's this incredible collection of girls and women of all ages, dads and gay men, right? And so it's a very unique combination. But everybody's happy, everybody's singing, right? As you leave the stadium, right, everybody's still singing. And that's the kind of thing that, like, they don't, the right wingers in America don't get. They don't understand joy because they have cut themselves off from it. to really make it. Now, let me add in Travis Kelce, who in American football plays tight end. It's half blocker, half pass catcher. He's, he'll be a Hall of Famer. And what I like to say about these particular group of men, and there are tens of millions of them here, Eric, in the US, is they are mad at a guy they could never be dating a girl they could never have. Does that make sense? And so it just brings up all of these feelings of inadequacy, which are really both curious and ironic, because most of the guys that feel this way are not like, they're not dudes who can't get a date sitting in their mom's basement, right? These are guys who are married, they have kids, they might have daughters. And so it just strikes them that, like, this is not how I see this. It holds up a mirror like, okay, I have everything materially, right? But what else do I have? And so I'm a fuck you white guy, so I must hate everything, because if everybody likes Taylor, then I must hate her just by reflex, if that makes sense. And so then you add in Donald Trump. Remember, Donald Trump is a guy who allegedly, Eric, doesn't like to be photographed with his youngest son, Barron, because Barron is about 6'8", and Trump doesn't like looking short next to him. Okay. So like, this is the level of, egomania that guy carries around with him. And so now you add in, again, a pretty young woman who is richer than he is, let's be clear, right? Who is certainly more popular than he is. And now they worry that someone like her could harm his reelection chances, because here's what they also know, and I'll get back to the point, is Trump's base is very, very low, right? Since 2015, 2016, his base of support has shrunk, and it's become more concentrated and more toxic and more radioactive. And so someone like a Taylor Swift represents not only a popularity they could never achieve, but a real changing of American culture that they are all committed to derailing. That could be Trump because of his transactional nature. It could be because of white Christian evangelical voters. It could be, again, just because of the fuck you white guys. Like, this is not the world I want. And again, the great irony of it is, like, these guys have everything they could want and need, right? They're growing up. Their kids are growing up. Whatever you say about, like, yes, there was COVID, and we've had a lot of black swans in America and the world. They're growing up in the safest and most prosperous time humanity has ever known, at least as far as America is concerned, right? Yeah, we've had our, but like, there's nothing that you can't do even today in the United States if you want to, right? And still, they choose to be pissed off. And so I think it's a sociological issue. I think it's a societal issue. I think it's a political issue. But the bottom line is, Taylor is a threat to them.
Wow. And I would imagine, like, because especially been on the Fox News, they've all been coming out saying that well, it started with Vivek Ramaswamy, who ran for president and has dropped out and has gone to the Trump side, of course, because he was always going to,
Right.
alleging that there's a conspiracy that the Chiefs football team, which is, they've been in the Super Bowl like 4 times or something in the last, I don't keep up.
4 times
when I
in
left
the last
America,
4 times in the last 6 years. Yeah.
Yeah. This is how long ago I left America, Reed. The Seahawks were still a bad football team when I left America. That's how long.
And
I've
probably
been
in the other, and probably in the other conference.
Yeah.
Right. They were still in the
that's
AFC.
But the Chiefs are a good football team. They would probably be in the Super Bowl anyway. They didn't need a dark web or dark government. People are buying this, that there's a conspiracy to get them in the football, to get them in the Super Bowl, and then to have Taylor be proposed to at halftime or something, and then she's going to announce that she's Biden's daughter. I mean, that's the level of, like, and they're buying it. It's coming out through the mainstream right-wing media now. How?
This is exactly the right question and the right observation, which is, remember that the right-wing media needs to keep its people in a bubble. It needs to create a world that has no relation to reality, but gives them the ability to take that sharp stick and just jam it into these people's adrenal glands and keep them angry, right? And so think about all of the stuff they've set up to now, right? They have to go further and further and further into crazy land, right? To make stuff up, because a normal conspiracy theory, take your pick, whatever it is, JFK or whatever, like, doesn't do it anymore, right? That's your run of the mill. So now it must be Roger Goodell, the commissioner of the NFL, is working with George Soros and the Trilateral Commission and Taylor Swift's parents to ensure that that the Chiefs make it to the Super Bowl, right? So that the dark forces of Bill Gates, who want to implant neural things in your brain, can all have everybody watching, and they're going to hypnotize us as you're watching the game, but you won't know it, right? So don't watch the game, right? Yada
Yeah.
yada yada. But this is Eric, this is the insanity, is they have to keep these people in the bubble, because if they don't, as soon as they cross through that semi-permeable layer,
Mm.
they wake up and they go, what the hell was that? What was that? Because history has shown us, especially in these sort of authoritarian movements where you have like a Donald Trump or somebody worse, if such a thing is possible, when that person goes away, when that culture collapses, when that movement disappears, people have in America what we call a Rip Van Winkle moment. They go, what was I thinking? This is
Yeah.
crazy. Why was I ever doing this? And they know that. And the other part too is they know that if Trump loses in November, right, their best opportunity to control the United States as an authoritarian / evangelical Christian movement, that's their best shot. It's their best shot and their biggest opportunity, but also their biggest worry, which is, yes, there will be other Trumpy types because so many Republican, politicians have bought into this now.
Yeah.
But if he wins, the sky's the limit for their insanity and for their awfulness. And if he loses, it's sort of like, okay, we've got 50 years worth of work. We've gotten a lot of stuff done, but now, like, where are we going to go from here? If that makes sense.
Yeah. And obviously, just picking up the mantle of what he believes and running with that doesn't work. And that's a reference to Ron DeSantis, who,
Sure.
tried all of that and just was a limp, um, a limp bowl of pudding.
Mm.
Which is, if you haven't heard, is a reference to the fact that he, tried to eat pudding with his fingers, which is an American dessert. And it's just disgusting. I don't want to talk about it anymore. But this, it, I mean, it is astounding that this is where, because I mean, well, and you think that it's laughable that this is what they're obsessed with. But then this week we had a guy who beheaded his father because his father worked for the federal government, and basically, then had a rant online about Biden and the deep state and everything else. So
Right.
it's real that, I mean, the people are there's going to be somebody out there who is plotting to kill Taylor Swift because of this. I'm sure there's crazies about her anyway because she's so popular. But I mean, they're going to think they have to save America by trying to kill her.
Right. And I think that if you go back to her, I guess it was I think they shot it in 2019. It was a documentary. It was on Netflix. I'm not sure it's there anymore, called Miss Americana. And there's a scene where she and her family are discussing, what she's going to do in the upcoming election. And she's from Tennessee. She lives in Tennessee, and there's a woman named Martha Blackburn who's a senator there, and she is a
Yeah.
kook of all kooks.
Yeah.
And Swift says, I'm going to come out against her. And her dad's like, don't do this. Don't do this. It's not that I don't agree with how you believe or what you believe. It's that I'm worried about your safety. And he even says at one
Yeah.
point, Eric, that's the reason I bought the armored cars. Right. And so,
Jesus.
like, I mean, yeah, and at one point, and just to use that same thing, like, she also understands the insanity of it. This is years ago. It's got to be even worse now for her in some
Yeah.
ways. I mean, she's, incredibly popular and successful and everything else. But again, this is not a normal life. And I think she understands this,
Yeah.
that she comes out of her apartment in New York, gets in this car, and they drive away. And she looks at the camera and she goes, I understand that this is not normal. Right. And so you're absolutely right, which is, you talk about the guy who beheaded his father, or in Seattle, I believe, or in Washington State, there was a man who killed his brother with a samurai sword, right? Because he was convinced by the QAnon conspiracy that his brother was possessed, right? Then you look at places like Allen, Texas, or Buffalo, New York, or the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. All of these all white men have all been very extremely radicalized online, usually through things like YouTube and Facebook, and got an 8chan and all these other places where I never even dare to go, Eric. And I'm not a shrinking violet on this stuff. And what you see is that, yeah, I mean, this is a blood-soaked movement, either in the individual with these families or in the multitude of, 10 people, 12 people, whatever, all of them, very few of them, in Tree of Life, it was Jews. In Buffalo, it was African
Mm.
Americans, right? Because it's the great replacement theory, right? That
Yeah.
whites are being prevented from having babies, so people of color can have more and replace. Well, look, that's just demographics, right?
Yeah.
White people in America got wealthier, they got more successful, they decided to have less kids, or they had kids later, right? And now there are other segments of the population that are having more kids or whatever. Like, welcome to demography, right? Like, not something
Yeah.
unusual. But the right wing, from Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon, the Christian evangelicals, all these people are using this stuff again to keep people wound up. And there's a professor at the University of Chicago here in the U.S. named Robert Pape, and he did a lot of studies after January 6th, 2021, that showed that he believes that as much as 10% of the country, of the United States, and this was a couple of years ago, could be
Mm.
radicalized now. Right now, this
Yeah.
is on the right. Now, there could be a few on the left, but it's going to be much less.
Yes.
Is both a percentage of the population and just a gross number of the population. But if you think about that, Eric, that's 30 million people.
Who have a lot of
That's
access to a lot of guns.
and more and more every day. And frankly, most of the places they live, like I live in the state of Utah, Eric, I can go down the road to a sporting goods store just 20 minutes south of where I live and buy 3 AR-15s. Okay. I could go to another store in another county and buy 3 more, and another store and another store. Next month, right, I could buy 3 more at each of those at each of those stores, plus
Yeah.
all of the ammunition to go with it and everything else, without a permit, without any training. I could wear it strapped to my across my chest to Starbucks, and no one could tell me I couldn't do it. And so there's, going back to your original question about Taylor Swift, is like, there's this weird, and when I say toxic, I don't mean it in the context of like toxic masculinity, although that is what it is. I guess I do
Yeah.
mean it that way. Is I got to show you how tough I am. I got to show
Mm.
you just how much I can say, fuck you, Eric, because you can't tell me what to do. Right? As if anybody wants to tell these people what to do. They just want to be left alone.
Yeah. I'm going to keep that as a clip and just use that where you just tell me to fuck you, Eric. I think that would be a nice promo shot.
Anytime you say something that somebody doesn't like, right?
Fuck you, Eric. I mean, I guess at the same time that it's terrifying because I mean, here in the UK we have, obviously it's sad when anything happens. We have some knife crime problems and the occasional
Right.
shooting. It's just such a different world, and you're validating my choice to leave. Even though I love America, and
Sure.
if I had the money, I'd be living in both places, but I don't. Just a little bit of Taylor Swift money would be nice. But I
Go to
guess the
work
other
on
part
her
of it,
tour. Go to work on her
yeah,
tour. She pays very well, as I
I could,
understand it.
I could
Be a
sing.
roadie.
Uh, I guess what's holding, so if there's that many people who are that radicalized, millions of people with that much access to the armor, what's holding us back from actually having that crossover into civil war? I mean, it sounds like it could be on the line, because I know that's the other thing that seems to be percolating is with the stuff happening around the Texas border, and I want to come to you on the border in
Sure.
general in a second, but just that rhetoric of well, even apparently Nikki Haley was backing the concept of succession this week. I just saw, I didn't read the article, but considering she's coming from South Carolina, that's a really interesting choice to be running for as president of the United States, because I believe they were the first state to
They were,
succeed
yes,
last time.
and the place where the Civil War started in
Yeah,
1861. Yes,
so that's a great message to reach out to the rest of America. So
right.
I mean, is there anything holding us back now, or is it just people thinking? I mean, maybe all the convictions from January 6th. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, and it's one I haven't frankly spent enough time sort of thinking deeply about. But off the top of my head, what I'd say, Eric, is that um, they're not particularly well organized. You see
that's
a
true.
lot of lone wolves, right?
Yeah.
Which is what we call stochastic terrorism, right? They take
Mhm.
cues from the likes of Trump and others who when they call people poisoning the blood or vermin, right? Like they
Yep.
take that stuff and they say, okay, I know what I'm supposed to do now. But the truth is that there's a combination of, a lot of times these guys aren't very bright. There's a lot of cosplay involved. Look, they were, all things considered, on January 6th, 2021, they were probably as well organized as they were going to be.
Yeah.
And we've seen in the past, Remember in the U.S. state of Michigan that there was a group of militia guys that were trying to get together to kill Gretchen Whitmer, the governor there. And that's the other part too, is that as these guys start to get organized, they talk too much, and usually somebody's connected to the FBI, and then the FBI figures it out, and they just wait and wait and wait, and then
Yeah.
so anytime you get a group, right, I don't want to say it's easy. I don't think those guys have anything easy on a daily basis, but I think
Yeah.
for the domestic law enforcement, I think it becomes more possible for them to root it out. But if you look at like the Proud Boys and the 3%ers, yeah, a lot of their leaders are in prison for the next 10, 12 years. So I think it's lack of organization. That's not to say that you couldn't have, as you talked about at the border, you have Texas state troopers, Texas National Guard on one side, federal officers, Border Patrol, FBI, whoever they are, on the other side of this line. Somebody decides, to fire off a round, or a round goes off, by accident, and then that's the beginning of the conflagration.
Yeah.
Or you see, remember back in, it's hard to believe it's almost been 4 years ago, but after the murder of George Floyd, remember that set off the Black Lives Matter protests, which then the Proud Boy types and a lot of local police here in the U.S. used as an opportunity to go beat the hell out of a lot of people.
Yeah.
But I think that, I'm going to knock on wood here. Fortunately for us at this moment, I don't see a great amount of organization that would allow for that. That's, of course, not to say it couldn't happen. I just don't know that we're ever going to know, like, okay, they decided, it's not going to be like September 1st, 1939, right? Like they decided to step off into Poland. I don't think it's going to be like that, but it's going to get weirder between now and November of this year. And we shouldn't assume that there won't be some more violence. We should assume there will be more violence of some sort between now and November.
Maybe that's just the cognitive switch of like, because I think that, for the general public, like January 6th snuck up on us because we weren't in this right-wing media bubble and weren't hearing the coded messages that other people said. When Trump said, come to DC, it will be wild. People switched in, could see that was a call to come. But the general public, probably even the people who were kind of like grumbling about Taylor Swift, but aren't like deep into the mire, probably haven't gotten there. But the way things are pushing, yes, I think if Trump wins, it changes. With the border, so I'm watching all this from afar. So the Taylor Swift thing, that makes more sense. It's insane. So the other thing that I've seen lots of times over the years is, and you were on the Republican side of this messaging for a while, if
Sure.
you will admit.
I grew up in it. I grew up in it. Yeah.
Using the border to scare us has been done for years, even before Trump. Using a crisis of immigration, all of that stuff, because fear works.
Right.
And so this last border crisis, that's been ramping up, since Biden took office, and then Kamala was doing a bad job, and people saying she'd never done anything, blah, blah, blah. It sounded like another one of those, the sky is falling. Oh,
Right.
here they go again, saying the border's a problem. But it does feel like the border is a real problem. So from 3,000 miles or more away,
Right.
is it real this time?
So yes is the answer, but let me go back to one thing. The irony of your remark about me working for Republicans is that I worked for both George W. Bush and John McCain, who were who was the president and leading presidential contender in 2007 when they were working with Teddy Kennedy to try and get a border deal done, and it was the wacko right wingers in the U.S. Senate that scuppered it. So, like, I worked for two guys who actually were all for immigration reform, right?
Yeah.
And then I think after that, yes, it definitely became more polarizing. And let's be clear too that I think it also it interceded with the racism of the Republican Party that was always a feature of it. It was it wasn't even unspoken. It was there, but it also just said it allowed right-wing Republicans to point to those people to the other. So let's go to now. I think it is a problem. And I think that both, Joe Biden as president and a lot of Democratic leaders in the U.S. House and U.S. Senate realize it's a problem, not only politically, but also in reality. And if you go down to the border, right, look, I went to high school and college in Texas. The border is a much different thing when you talk to people from Texas than you talk to people from New York City, because you know what, for people in the Rio Grande Valley, it's a reality. Right. It's their everyday life. And so if you're in Nuevo Laredo in Mexico and you live in Laredo in Texas, right, you got family on both sides of the border, maybe in a different time now, because most of those border towns are sort of controlled by cartels now. So you don't want to like when I was at college, we used to go to Laredo, right? Like it was fun. Like I wouldn't
Mm.
send my child there now for anything if I didn't
Yeah.
have to. And so now, yeah, it is being, I don't want to say it's overrun, but they do have a lot of people trying to cross at various points. And they're coming from Haiti, right? Which means they had to get on a boat.
Yeah.
They're coming from Central and South America, whether or not it's Guatemala or Venezuela, because these countries are broken, right? They, for the
Mm.
most part, certainly Venezuela, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of crime, there's a lot of corruption. In some places, they say it's, like if it's not safe to go outside your house, right? There's no opportunity there. And so, they make their way north. Mexico could stop them at their southern border, but they don't, right?
Mm.
They don't turn around there. They let them come all the way through. And then they get to our border, and the idea is sort of if you make it over the Rio Grande, or if you make it past a border checkpoint, you're probably home free.
Mm.
I would say this is that you do, look, lines on a map still matter, right?
Yeah.
In 2024. And if you don't have a good idea of who's coming, why they're coming, et cetera, then it's hard to say that the border is secure. And so now you have a situation, to your opening point, where Biden's like, okay, I'm all for it. Let's do it. And now
Mm.
you have Republicans saying out loud, the border's a crisis. Joe Biden caused it. But we're not going to do anything about it because Donald Trump wants to use it as an issue, and we don't want to take it away from him. And so this is just a continuation, Erich, of the hypocrisy of the Republican Party, which is they either want to complain or they want to rule, but they don't want to govern, if that makes sense. And there's a difference between ruling and governing. Ruling is you do what I say or I throw you in a jail cell. Governing is we have to work together. And so now what you see is, and then you have Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, who I remember when he was a state Supreme Court justice and then attorney general, he was always more conservative than me, which is not a lot, not saying much, but he was normal, all things considered. He has now decided, like, I'm going to cross over and do all of these things because, maybe I could be attorney general in another Trump presidency, right? So I'm going to do everything I can, to make sure I can do this. He's wasted $5 billion in Texas taxpayers' money, right? You got Texas National Guardsmen and Guardswomen at the border, basically like sitting on gravel roads. They have no ability to do anything other than sit there. They have to go to the bathroom in buckets, literally. There's no facilities for them. And a bunch of them have taken their own lives because they're so depressed about being far away from home and their families and everything else. So, like, it's all just a stunt. But this goes to the bottom line, whether or not it's those guardsmen or whether or not it's the migrants coming over the border for whatever reason. And yes, I think you do have to have an idea of who's in your country. There's no humanity in it, Erich, right? Remember the Trump administration's decision was, if you're going to come as a family, we're going to separate you from your kids, right?
Yeah.
Now, there are lots of things you can say about border policy. Separating parents and kids, as a deterrent, sure, maybe it works. But the other side is like, we still have kids in this country who don't know where their parents are. Right. Yeah. And that's not American as far as I'm concerned in what it means to have a secure border that understands. And look, we need these folks too, right? We have a declining birth rate. We have a lot of jobs that Americans won't do. Even first or second generation Americans won't do. And so it's not like we don't need, frankly, more people to come work. It's that we need to understand the process by which they're coming. And again, I don't think that's an unreasonable standpoint, either if you're a Democrat or a Republican. But again, if you're a Democrat, there's plenty of people on your left flank who are like, we should have open borders. And there's plenty of people on the right who say we should shoot these people in the middle of the Rio Grande. And like, neither of those things are answers.
No, there's no, there's got to be somewhere in the middle. I mean, the bill that's been put forward, that's been written by no, blushing liberal lily flower, James Lankford, who's been behind it, who's an Oklahoma senator,
Right.
which, Oklahoma, and he's conservative. And apparently this bill, which no one has seen at this point we're recording it, it's got a lot of right-wing giveaways or things that, because the other side of it is they're putting Ukraine funding in there and all these things. But it seems like exactly what happened a little bit with Obamacare, in that Obamacare originally was written with all these sops to the right. Well, no, we'll do it this way. We'll do it this way. And then the right just kept going, no, because they won't allow for the win. It's the same playbook over and over and again.
Yeah, it's Lucy and the Football with Charlie Brown, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if the UK they get that. I don't know what the equivalent would be. But if you don't know that reference, you should look it up because it's a classic.
Somebody
But yeah,
somebody
it's
trying to
it's
kick a rugby
swiping
ball
the
and
ball.
throwing swiping it away
Yeah,
from you or whatever, right?
every single time. But Democrats fall for it every time, just like Charlie Brown did, because we are suckers for that thing you mentioned earlier, government.
Well, and I
So
would say this is, look, I've spent the last 4 years working with a lot of Democrats, and there's two things I say out of love. One is I can't believe we ever lost to you. Second is you're worse at this because you're better people, right? Because when you listen, no, I mean, Eric, when you're a young Republican operative, um, the mantra is just win. You do
yeah,
what you can to win that election because, as Mitch McConnell famously said, winners make policy and losers go home. There's no moral victory in an
yeah,
election. Somebody wins and somebody loses. And that's like us at the Lincoln Project. Like, that's how we see it, which is Donald Trump's going to win or Donald Trump's going to lose. It's our job to make sure he loses, right?
yeah.
If it's not like, oh, it'll be fine. It won't be fine. It won't be fine. Look, if you look at the Supreme Court, right, and the overturning of Roe v. Wade a couple of years ago, that was a
Yeah.
40-year program
Yeah.
by the evangelical right wing. They knew what they wanted, and they chipped away, and they chipped away, and they chipped away, and they got what they needed, and they got what they wanted, while Democrats are like, we got the president, everything will be fine. Oh, except that you don't understand the nature of power, and Republicans
Mm-hmm.
do, which is Mitch McConnell's like, I'm the leader of the Senate. Merrick Garland's never going to be a Supreme Court justice on my watch,
Yeah.
right? And that's the nature of how we're seeing this is Republicans and these people, again, they tend to be, it's all the right-wing evangelical Christian nationalist movement, whatever, has co-opted the Republican Party, and Donald
Yeah.
Trump's happy to let them because they're in it together. It's all about power. That's all it's about. There's no higher level thinking. There's no higher level morality or vision. It's
Mm.
just we want to be in charge.
Yeah. And for Trump not going to prison,
Well,
that
that's
helps as well.
yes, and
That's
we
another
should always
incentive.
remember that. That's really, look. If he didn't think he was going to go to jail, I'm not sure he'd have run again. Right?
No. Yeah.
Because he could have had, the Saudis already gave a $2 billion payoff to his son-in-law. Right? He would have figured things out. So, some gajillionaire right-wing donors would have supported his lifestyle for the next 10
Oh,
or
yeah.
15 years. Right? But with the specter of prosecution, he's like, well, I've got to do this again.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think that there's a chance? So this bipartisan border bill, which again we're recording this, and it hasn't come out yet, but apparently the Senate is pushing forward and going to do an initial vote in the following week. Do you think it has any snowball's chance in hell since Trump is saying I don't want this, and the House looks not so keen?
I don't give
Because
it a
there,
lot of hope. I don't give it a lot of hope.
yeah,
But I do cross my fingers that like, so Speaker Mike Johnson, who went from backbench wacko to Speaker of the House in like a week,
mm,
I think is understanding now what it means to be Speaker of the House. It's a real job
yeah,
for us, and he's got to keep the government funded. He's got to keep his right wing buddies happy. He knows he's got to get Ukraine funding, even if he doesn't really dig it. He knows he's got to get Israel funding, which he probably believes in, but not because of like belief in Israel, but because they believe that Jesus is going to come back to Jerusalem sometime, and like we have to be in charge of it.
yeah,
So and so it would seem hard to me that if Johnson lets it go, he'll let it go knowing that it's probably the end of his speakership.
mm.
The head of lettuce test, I think, that you guys had over there.
Oh, yeah. Liz Truss was incredible.
Right.
That,
But
that,
I
that
would say that, yeah, I less than 50-50. Long answer.
Yeah, that'll be fascinating to see if they take it away from him. But again, yeah, and how that then. Well, that turns us. I'll let you go in just a second because you've been generous with your time as always. To Biden a little bit because this becomes a Biden issue because they're beating him up on the border. So if we've had a couple of people on recently, SE Cup and Joe Walsh just recently both said
Sure.
that the border is killing Biden. That this is going to be what costs him the election if the election were today. I mean, I guess in general, because you said actually in our last time we talked was in September 2022, right before the midterms, which you correctly pretty much predicted would, I put you on the spot there and you did a good job of predicting what would happen. But you also said that you could see Biden running again if Trump ran again, because he said, he had the position of, look, I won last time, I can beat this guy. I mean,
Right.
do you think it's still our best bet with all that's going on to have Biden be at the head of that Democratic ticket?
Yes. One, because that's what we're getting. So, be for what is.
Yeah.
And secondly, look, we've spent 4 years fighting this guy, more
Mm,
actually, even before the Lincoln Project. There is a specific way you have to fight him, and it's not
mm,
normal politics. And I think that President Biden personally and his campaign understand that. And trying to take on Trump is not sort of an on the job training thing, right?
mm.
Because you have to understand that it's not about policy for him and it's not about anything else. It's all about him.
Yeah.
Um, if the election were held today, I think Joe Biden wins, to be honest.
Mm, okay.
I mean, if you look at the outcomes of the Iowa caucuses a couple of weeks ago and the New Hampshire primary, yes, Trump won those. He should. He's the former president of that party, the leader of that party, right? And the one who controls its base. Yeah, no shock, he won. But if you look down in the numbers there, Eric, like there were a lot
Mm,
of alarm bells that should be going off. When you have almost half the voters who said they voted for your now main opponent, Nikki Haley, saying that if Trump is the nominee, they won't vote for him, they'll vote for Joe Biden. That's
mm,
crazy town, right? That's
yeah.
not normal. That's not a normal thing that says, I'm going to take a Republican, and if I don't get the Republican I want, I'm going to vote for the Democratic president of the United States. Like, that's not normal. I think,
Mm,
too, on the border is that the president and his administration are now making the right moves. People like us, right, will start to hold. In fact, Rick Wilson, who I think you've had on too, is already writing
yeah.
scripts on this. Like, we're going to kick the shit out of the Republicans on this, right? So, like, remember that this is not; these things don't occur in a vacuum. Like, the
Mm,
Republicans get to do this, but like we get to fight back, right?
yeah.
Like, no, they don't get to just go out and do this stuff. And then I would also say this is, you say, okay, well, there's issues with younger voters vis-a-vis Gaza. Okay. And there's the border. Okay. All those things. But remember too, Eric, and I don't know if you guys suffered from this in the UK, is like the American voter has the memory of a goldfish, right?
Yeah.
Whatever the issue is now, early February 2024, by August 2024, pretty good chance it's going to be something else entirely.
Yeah.
Um, and remember too that, again, the worst people in the world want Donald Trump to win. So they will be
Mm,
doing this stuff too. Like Bibi Netanyahu is, he's trying to make this thing go longer because he knows as soon as it's quote unquote over, he's done, right?
yeah.
He's done. And,
Yeah.
and the Israeli people don't want him anymore, right? They
No.
don't. And a friend of mine over there said, when this is done, the aftermath of October 7th, Netanyahu will be gone. And if he's not gone, it won't be hundreds of thousands of people in the street like it was for this judicial stuff he was trying to do. It will be
Yeah.
millions of people in the street. And so, Biden and Jake Sullivan, his national security advisor, and Tony Blinken, his secretary of state, like they're going over there and they're beating Netanyahu over the head, say, cut this shit out,
Yeah.
right? Like, stop. All right. You had a point. You went over the line.
Mm,
And that's, again, Joe Biden. Remember, Joe Biden's been doing this a long time. He understands that politics and policy are often one and the same. The
mm,
politics and policy of Israel post October 7th was go hunt terrorists.
yeah.
It was not go kill as many innocent Gazans as you possibly can, right?
Yeah.
And say, yes, we got one guy today. Again, with the border, yes, the border is an issue. Biden's trying to Biden's going to them, right? As he
Yeah.
has for the first 3 years of his presidency and saying, let's make a deal. Remember,
Mm,
all the stuff he's gotten done in the first 3 years, he wouldn't have gotten done without Republicans,
yeah.
right? So, like, they've been willing to go along with this stuff because they realize, look, you now have, as a side, you now have Republican members of Congress and the U.S. Senate going to like bridge, openings and
Yeah.
railroad crossing ribbon cuttings saying, we're so proud. And then people go, but you voted against this, right? You didn't want this, but like they're happy to have it, right?
Yeah.
They voted against it, but they're also happy to take credit for it. And so I think there's a couple of things that this election is really going to come down to: competence versus chaos, and honor versus corruption.
Mm,
Joe Biden is an honorable guy, and he is a competent leader. Donald Trump is corrupt and he's chaotic. And the American economy is on a tear right
mm,
now. Just had another, as we're recording this, just had another great jobs report,
Yep.
353,000 new jobs in January of 2024. And you can now start to see that the sentiment is turning. And when I say that, like, I love Joe, and I don't know SC personally, but I know Walsh personally,
Mm,
is if you look at recent surveys out of like Pennsylvania, Biden's beating Trump by like 7, 51,
mm,
46 or 44 something, right? Like, so the things are starting to turn. Does that mean it's going to be easy? No. Does that mean that there will be bad weeks for the president? There will be, but there will also be bad weeks for Trump. The
yeah.
difference is that Trump can't get out of his own way.
Yeah.
And the things that he does, remember that base we were talking about, those radicalized people, they're his people. They're
Mm,
always going to be with him, and he will always go to them first. And
yeah.
because of that, this whole other wedge of voters that could be gettable for him are either completely ungettable forever or unlikely to come back to him because they're like, I can't do it again. I can't do it
Yeah.
anymore. This guy's been around for 8, 9 years. It never stops. It's old. I'm sick of it. Right. I don't want to have to think about this stuff anymore. That's what authoritarians do, is they make everything political, going back to Taylor Swift. It can't be a pretty pop star and a great football player dating. It has to be, the Davos, kings making a decision about how to keep Donald Trump out of the White House. Like, it doesn't have any basis in reality. But at the end of the day, I do believe, look, I feel better now than I felt in months about what's going on. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy.
Okay.
But I think at the end of the day, more Americans are going to say, Joe Biden's old, but Donald Trump's not what I want back.
Well, I will take that as that's a good place to end. Because I'm going to hold on to that in case you say something else that scares me. So, um, but
Well,
yeah.
I'm going to say plenty of things that scare you. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, no,
Right.
I know. The gun thing and the 30%, that's going to leave me worried because my daughter wants to go to America on her own next year for the first time. So yeah, I can't think about that right now. But well, I really appreciate you coming on and giving insight into the stuff that seems like it's happening, that is happening, and I really appreciate it. It's been great catching up with you, Reed. Thank you so much.
No, listen, Eric, thanks for having me.
So there we go. Another amazing conversation. I mean, just proper political geeking out, but also just to say what is really happening? Is this border crisis a real thing? Because the Republicans have gone on about it for ages, if you follow any of this, and also why this Taylor Swift thing is happening at this moment, because it is over the next 2 weeks in the run up to the Super Bowl in the US. It's only going to get more heated and insane. Um, it was interesting to hear him say that over the last few years that working with Democrats has that he can't believe that they lost to us, and that the Democrats are better people. It's nice to hear, but also the sincerity of what Democrats do. And there are good Republicans, of course there are, but the weakness is that they're trying to govern. And if you're willing to exploit that, especially the way that Donald Trump and the current mega Republicans have, it's hard because Democrats are willing to make sacrifices to get the job done. And these people on the other side right now don't care. They only care about winning, and in Donald Trump's case, staying out of jail. So it was interesting to see him give us that little concession. I'm sure that if you could flash back 15, 20 years ago and have him, say to Reed, you're going to be saying these nice things about Democrats, I'm sure he would have thought you were mental. But there we are. Really appreciate him coming on to give his time. I feel more up to date about what's happening. Scared, but up to date. So do give him. He's still on Twitter, and he's also on Threads, which I'm going to be pushing more as I shift away from Twitter as it implodes into the shit show that it is. So check him out at Reed Galen, and of course the Lincoln Project itself. It's good to follow at Project Lincoln. Check out what they're doing. Their adverts are always very cutting and very funny, and they really wind Donald Trump up. So they're a good thing to check out as well. Again, always let us know if there's some guests you'd like me to try and get on. If you've got somebody you'd like me to talk to, just send them my way. Find me on YouTube as well, where we are. The full video is there. So if you want to actually see our lovely faces, we are on the YouTube. And subscribe to the platform that you're listening to. Give us a review if you've enjoyed it, because of course that helps spread the word. Let people know about it. And thank you very much for listening, watching, and engaging. And we will see you next time. Bye.